Jacob, let's go through the announcement. Wales touched on some of it, and the fact that basically the PIF, this fund, have bought the sovereign wealth fund, the country's 4 largest clubs.
Yeah, and of course we already know the PIF because they own Newcastle United, or 80% stake in it. And people thought, well, to an extent, that's their involvement in football sorted. They're Newcastle's owners. So they've bought Saudi Arabia's largest 4 clubs. Those are Al Nassr, who Ronaldo plays for, Al Hilal, Al-Ittihad, the reigning champions, and Al Ahly. And as well as that, another 4 clubs have all had massive injections of private investment from 4 different companies. Those companies are all state-owned. They include Aramco, the state oil company, and NEOM, who are kind of building this super city in the desert in the northwest of the country. So could kind of lead to this almost 2 or 3 tier league system, which Wael alluded to.
Adam, with your European football contacts, what are the noises across Europe at what is happening here?
I think initially it was this kind of, will they really do it? Are they really serious kind of sense? You know, obviously we knew they'd done Ronaldo, but you know, there were these stories about there's going to be more to come. They're going to try and get Messi. They'll go Benzema. They'll go for Kante. And what you're basically seeing is they are really going to do it. At the moment, you know, I think from an agent's perspective, it's an absolute dream, because if you have a client in a European club, you can basically say, we have interest from Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is interested in basically every famous player over the age of 30. That appears to be the target market at the moment. They want big names. They want a splash. They want people that, you know, you're going to turn your heads to. And I think that's where it is at the moment. And I think that the aim is to get probably 20 to 25 players over the next 12 months or so into Saudi Arabia. And you know, having seen what we've seen at Newcastle, whether we're looking at the golf or we're looking at boxing, when Saudi Arabia decides it wants to do something, it does it. And it generally gets its way. So I think that's what we're going to see.
Jacob, how good at the moment? How good is this league?
Not great as an entire league. So there's some stats done by sports intelligence agency 21st Group, and that rates the Saudi Pro League as the 58th highest quality league in the world. I guess some caveats in that is that it's taking kind of the average strength of a team in the league. The top teams in the Saudi league kind of do have a relatively large advantage over those at the bottom. But just for context, that kind of puts it around the level of kind of Scottish Premiership and Serie C in Italy. And they've said that they want the goal of reaching the top 10, which is quite a dramatic jump.
What I would say, though, Jacob, and this was in Chappers, you're obviously there in Qatar as well in December. While the quality of the league may not be that high, the level of support and interest in football in Saudi Arabia is huge, right? And the rivalry between Al Nassr, Al Hilal is a proper rivalry, right? They hate each other in the same way as, you know, we could talk about Celtic and Rangers or any kind of equivalent. That's a serious rivalry. There's a proper football base there.
And their international team had a good World Cup as well.
Really good World Cup. The best, I would say, one of the best days of the World Cup in Qatar, atmosphere-wise, was the day they beat Argentina, and you had thousands of fans driving over the border, and also a huge interest in, I suppose, what we would call like supporting players. You know, there is huge kind of Ronaldo fandom, Messi fandom, Benzema fandom, huge Real Madrid, Barcelona interest as well. So I think this is different to, so for example, if like the Qatar League was doing this, you'd be a bit more like, well, who's actually going to go and watch this stuff? Whereas with Saudi, there is a genuine fanaticism around football as well.
So I mean, okay, you said Qatar doing this, but is this different to China trying to do this, a decade ago? Do you think? Or are there similarities? I mean, there's nothing new in countries trying to take their domestic game to a new level or new audiences by bringing in the slightly older European footballer. I mean, America tried it in the 70s with Beckenbauer and Best and Pele. and China tried it in the sort of 2010s here. So is there anything different, do you think, Adam? First, we'll go around everybody, but you go first, Adam.
I don't think the aspiration is so different. You know, the Chinese investments are obviously hugely linked to the state as well. There was this, I think we talk about Vision 2030 with Saudi Arabia, which is essentially this diversification of the economy plan by Mohammed bin Salman. It taps in as well to what Wael said around, I suppose, entertainment opening up, and we'll probably talk more about that later in terms of, I suppose, the counter arguments with that. But I think the Chinese had this ambition around 2050, you know, in terms of making their football league competitive and having a national team. And there was also this view it was all going to lead up to a World Cup bid for China that's not materialized. That's partly because the Chinese state decided it had other priorities. COVID also played a part in that as well. We know that if Saudi Arabia doesn't have a World Cup within the next decade, I would be staggered, right? It's either going to be 2030 or 2034, as far as I can tell. And I think that's a huge part of it as well, in terms of making sure that it is a relevant market within football by that point. So is it profoundly different as a strategy? I'm not sure. Will it be more effective? Possibly, because we keep seeing Saudi Arabia be very, very effective from a sporting strategy point of view. The other thing I'd say is that China never got a Ronaldo, a Messi, Benzema level player. The level was below that. They were good players, but they weren't, we can't ignore you players. And that is the reality of what, you know, I know Messi's not there yet. He may not go there. But if you have Ronaldo at Al Nassr, Messi at Al Hilal, then, you know, you've kind of smashed the market.
Jacob?
Yeah, I agree with Adam in that. I think it's ultimately a question of scale rather than kind of any different kind of aim. By getting a Messi, a Ronaldo, a Benzema, you do tap into that supporting a player rather than a team. And I don't also think that that's so unusual. Like, it can be, sort of has been looked down on a bit by some people kind of in Europe. If you kind of look at the NBA or something, there's very similar levels of fandom there. And just by doing that, you get eyes on it. It'll be really interesting to see how they kind of pursue, say, broadcasting rights for it, or get pundits, and all of those kind of little side bits will kind of lead into this whole battle, which you probably didn't get in China.
Well,
yeah, I very much agree with both Jacob and Adam in the sense that the strategy is not something new. The approach is not something new. It is something that has been done by China. It actually has been done by Qatar even 20 years ago. And the fact that, you know, we don't even talk about that now shows you that it can go very wrong. You know, it can go very wrong. But I think, yeah, the differences here are things like, again, like Adam has mentioned, the passion for football in Saudi Arabia is on a whole different level. That's one thing that wasn't available in China when they did this. The other thing is being connected to the rest of the world. Obviously, in China, let's look at it from a social media perspective. The clubs have come in, they brought in all these superstars, but they don't even have presence on mainstream social media. So they're not part of that. In Saudi Arabia, it's completely different from that sense. You look at a club like Al Hilal, who is already, before this starts, is one of the top 10 most followed clubs on Twitter in the whole world. So yeah, there is, you know, there is a significant to it. And then this ties up with other things as well. Saudi Arabia is obviously, again, as mentioned, Vision 2030. They're trying to attract tourism. They're trying to do all sorts of other things that tie in with this. And that's what gives us maybe a more likelihood of it being successful. I do wonder also about the same question by 2030, if things don't go to plan, if they don't have a World Cup or maybe an Olympics, do they continue down that road, or do they basically do what China did and say, yeah, you know what, we have other priorities?
Wow, can I ask you something? I've got some really good friends in Saudi Arabia who are incredibly excited about what's happening from a sports point of view. One of the things that they criticize, and I know that people listening will think there's far bigger things to talk about. One of the things they talk about is the need to build better stadiums in Saudi Arabia. Are any plans for that underway? Because at the moment, that infrastructure is not what you would expect of if you are a Ronaldo, Benzema kind of level player.
Yeah, I fully agree. And even Ronaldo himself, he did an interview with the league last week, and he actually mentioned infrastructure. So when you have your biggest star coming in on the official channels on an interview and saying, yeah, if there's one thing I would develop is infrastructure, that is an issue. But yes, there are plans in place for that. Actually, Saudi Arabia has bid to host the 2027 Asian Cup, and that'll be the first time for them to host it, which is obviously a big deal for Saudi. And as part of that, there will be redevelopment of a lot of the existing stadiums and building new stadiums. And the approach has actually been the same. Aramco have taken ownership of developing the biggest stadium in the eastern region where they're based. Al-Shabaab, the fifth club in Saudi Arabia, have actually just about completed their new stadiums in which they will play next season. So there is definitely a plan in place for that. They're also bidding to host the 2026 Women's Asian Cup. So again, part of that, there is also an infrastructure development drive.